Hello all, I'm Anu Anajo, Senior Associate Research at CPPR, and I welcome you to Policy Beyond Politics. In this episode, we'll be discussing on the topic Navigating Kerala's Business Landscape, a focus on decriminalization. Establishing a favorable legal environment is imperative for improving the ease of doing business. Kerala, with its Industrial Policy 2023, places a strong emphasis on attracting investors and enhancing the business environment in the state. The presence of various laws governing business activities in the state prompts us to consider whether these laws facilitate or rather hinder the growth of entrepreneurial ecosystem. To dive deeper into Kerala's business landscape and especially to focus on decriminalization, we have with us Mr. T Nandakumar, who is a retired IAS officer with more than 40 years experience in policy making, implementation and administration, and he has worked in Bihar, Jharkhand, Kerala, Gujarat and Delhi. He has contributed to policy formulation in the areas of food, sugar and ethanol, edible oils, agriculture, horticulture, dairying, industrial development, and the list goes on. With your extensive experience, we couldn't have found a more fitting person for this discussion. I'm certain that this conversation will be enlightening for all our listeners. Welcome, sir.
Thank you.
The government of India has been focusing on simplifying and streamlining existing regulations to improve the efficiency and effectiveness of governance and ease of doing business. In this regard, the Lok Sabha passed the Jan Vishwas Act 2023 during the monsoon session of the Parliament. The Act proposes to decriminalize 183 provisions in 42 legislations, including several outdated colonial era laws, with the aim to improve the ease of doing business. So, as you know, most of our listeners might be familiar with the term ease of doing business, and decriminalization might not be a familiar term for them. So could you please explain to our listeners what does decriminalization mean in its true spirit?
Well, let's start from the beginning. I think many of our laws we inherited from the British, and it continued for a long time with minor amendments here and there, and we followed along the same track for quite some time, past regulations, because we were confronted with a shortage economy. There were many things in short supply, and therefore all our economic policies looked at initially import substitution. It's much later that we said, okay, we can be competitive in the world market and we can produce for the world. I mean, it's a much later post 1991 kind of a thinking. Till then, I think we were into a shortage mindset. Now, ease of doing business, as you said, was something which was attempted fairly early, but it took a long time. I remember the first report was written by Vivek Debroy, currently chairman of the PM's Economic Advisory Council, on which laws need to be scrapped. And at that time, I think it was a UNDP project, and he had identified large number of legislations which are redundant. Not necessarily from a business perspective, but from an ease of business or an ease of living perspective as well. Then the BRAP came from the Department of Industrial Policy, the first attempt at a kind of competitive federalism where states were told that you should reduce a legal burden on business. Then, of course, you mentioned the Jan Vishwas Act of 23. But essentially what it did was, one was it looked at various central laws and removed the criminality part of it, and also suggested to state government that you remove the criminality from many of your acts. Now, what decriminalization really means is that in many laws, we will find that minor offenses relating to running a business, like, for example, non-maintenance of a record, or not a timely payment of the EPF contribution. Something of that sort attracts a criminal kind of a punishment. That it says, if you do not do this, or if you have not maintained these registers, or even if you have not produced it before an inspector who has asked for it, you can be prosecuted and you can be punished with a fine and imprisonment or both. Now, in the modern day business environment, this is regressive and very restrictive because it puts unnecessary burden on the entrepreneur who is running a small or large business. Many of these are civil offenses. So it is not that decriminalization removes the violation per se and it should not be punished. The argument is that any violation of a civil nature should be penalized by a civil liability, which could be a fine, which could be a penalty, which could be an interest burden, whatever. I think that's the essential concept. For every small thing, you don't have to be told that you can go to jail. You can be told, okay, you caused a loss to somebody and pay for it. That's the decriminalization in my, and we can find many places where this can be done very, very effectively.
Thank you for opening our discussion on explaining what does decriminalization mean. Sir, you have been part of the committee that was constituted by the government of Kerala to scrutinize all acts and rules relevant to business community and citizens as part of the initiative of ease of doing business in the state of Kerala. And also you are a person who have worked in other states as well. So I would like to know your take on the regulatory framework that govern the business environment of Kerala. How do you see that?
Well, I would think that Kerala has overdone its bit on regulation. It's for some reason, I think it's very restrictive in many ways. Of course, not that other states are have not done it, but I think they have found that these things are unproductive and they have been fairly quick in removing some of these restrictive provisions. Now, let me give you an example. The Shops and Establishments Act requires a registration. That's true of every state. I mean, there's no state which probably in my knowledge, there's nobody who says no registration is required. Now, most states started with a 1-year registration validity, but Orissa has done it away by saying you register once until you surrender it, that's for life. Maharashtra has done it for 10 years or 15 or 20 years. Many states have said that, look, this annual registration and renewal is a process of harassment. It's nothing to do with decriminalization, but to give you an example of how restrictive situations can be. Kerala, as far as I know, is still a 1-year validity. Now, this is something that is not required. After all, Shops and Establishments Act registration is only to capture a certain amount of data and certain compliance of regulations. Now, which can be done without, once you are registered, you are registered. I mean, it's not something that you should annually check whether he's there or not. Now, if it is a question of getting annual fees, you could compound, like Motor Vehicles Act compounded about 15, 20 years ago and said you pay 15 years of tax at one stage. Before that, everybody had to pay every year motor vehicle tax, and the process of paying was more painful than the amount that you paid as tax. So a 15-year compounding when you buy a vehicle made things easy for everyone. So the idea is that you don't lose revenue, but remove the harassment. So Kerala, I would think, has to probably look at least about 30 to 40 acts where the whole process has to be simplified.
Yeah, sir, you talked about the simplification. Now, what we understood from the reports, newspaper reports, is that the committee was also mandated to look into the decriminalization of business laws as well. So how far are we in tandem with the central government in terms of decriminalization and then improving the ease of doing business? Do you think it's a step in the right direction, or are we heading towards a right direction with respect to the reforms right now that's been planned at least?
No, I think the union government has been monitoring the progress made by the states, and they have been putting these indexes out for public domain. I believe Kerala has moved up the index quite a bit, but I see it very differently. I have some issues with the union index as well, but that's separate. I think we have to look at it from a simple point of view. What does Kerala want? Given the Kerala context, the type of industries that will come here are either something that is very heavily technology driven, which could be software, which could be artificial intelligence, robotics, fintech, any of those, or something related to agri-food processing, which is spices, fish, whatever else, coconuts, whatever else you want to say, horticulture. Now, look at what Kerala wants to do with its own set of investments, which is mostly tourism, agri-processing, modern technology, which is driven by skills and education. That's my broad canvas. Look at it and make it very simple for people. Don't look at indices across India or across the world. And they're fine. They're fine for multinationals to invest. But I think Kerala's growth will come from much larger number of small and medium enterprises, which will probably plug into the global market, because that's the way technology will work. Make it easy for them and look at what hinders them, rather than look at an all India level index and try and win the race there. That's not going to help you, because a couple of investments will not come, like for instance metal processing, anything that requires large quantities of land, anything which has an adverse impact on ecology. They are not going to come to Kerala, and nor is it advisable to bring them here. So let's look at it in a very specific Kerala context and look at simplifying things. The problem here is there are multiple departments which have their own fiefdoms, and they don't want to let go of control. I think that's where the challenge will be, starting with local self-government.
Right. So that in a way partially answers my subsequent question, which I was about to ask you regarding, now since the decriminalization is being talked about a lot, there is a trend in removing the imprisonment provisions and substituting it with fines and higher fines, basically. So you said there should be a simplification in laws as well. But my question is, do we need to critically look into the laws? What is the rationale behind certain laws? Because some of the restrictions imposed, they can create, they can hinder the overall business development, especially when it comes to, in the terms of scaling up of a business. Because when there are restrictions, people don't have the incentive to scale up their business activity. How do you view that?
Well, I think you have three questions in one. So
Yes.
Let me take one by one.
Yeah.
The first is that many laws and regulations and rules that exist in the statute book, I would think that we can substantially reduce them by repealing some of them, or just throwing away the rule book itself. Because some of these have come from a historical baggage, and those type of baggages don't exist now. You can have comfort in having them, but nothing will happen because people won't come. They're scared of those things. The second is that do we need these kind of laws at all? Whom are we protecting? And to what extent are we effective? Now, I said about decriminalization, I still don't have data, but I can sort of say with some amount of confidence that most of these prosecutions have not led to any punishment, nor to any deterrent. Because there is a small violation, let's say, of somebody not having kept a particular register. You go and file a case in some judicial magistrate's court who are already overworked with other major cases, and your own inspector has to go and appear and prosecute, and it ends up in a fine of 500 rupees after a 3-year struggle. I mean, is it worth even for the government to do this? Forget about the industrialist. For him, it would have been easier if you have told him, like a train, you travel without a ticket, you pay double the fare and get out. I mean, that would have been a much easier solution. That's what the second part is. The third part is there are many laws which are being introduced with some purpose, but somewhere you bring in a coercive provision or a restrictive provision into that act. I can think of something like the farmers' pension thing. There is some act which wants to establish a regulatory body and give a pension to farmers. Fine, no problem with that. But Since there are no resources in the government, what they have done is they have levied a tax on people who are processing agriculture products in Kerala. The moment you levy a tax, you need an inspector who will verify the returns or ask them to file the returns. Then you bring in a new inspector, Raj, through the back door just to collect 1% of something, which in the last 3 years has been zero. But the threat of that inspection remains on the statute book. So if any inspector suddenly decides to act and says, I want to check something, then it becomes a harassment. And there is something for, I think, agriculture labor where the farmers are expected to keep some registers. Now, which farmer keeps registers? I mean, most of them are less than 1 hectare farmers here. So unless you are a plantation of some size. So, it's a kind of thoughtless regulation that is coming in. So my view is that, you need to think through the whole process. What is it that you want to get? And what is it that you want to protect? You want to protect labor interests, you protect the environment, fine, no problem with it. But is the instrument that you are deploying to achieve that objective a rational, humane, and a hassle-free instrument? Or is it a tool in the hands of lower bureaucracy to harass somebody? This question we need to ask for every section, every rule. Then we will come to the right conclusion, because we should be very clear that where there should be a criminal punishment, it should be there. If somebody's life or limbs are in danger, it is a criminal offense, no doubt. But if it is a question of some observance of some procedural thing, is it that criminal? Should it be, a place where it should be rectified? What is rectifiable? So I think we have to draw up this metrics and say, okay, what is it that you want to really, implement, and what is it that you can just sort of allow the people to self-certify? And today, the whole world is moving towards self-certification. Right. Because I think India clearly had an overdose of Inspector Raj, and they paid the price for it. So today, the compliance is digital, the compliance is self-certified. So I think we have to move. So Kerala, a lot of laws and more importantly, a lot of rules will have to go wholesale, and some of them, of course, have to be removed from the act itself, some sections. So it's a part and whole kind of removal that we have to do.
Yeah, since you touched upon the removal of certain laws, I want to cite here an example. Like we looked into the welfare fund acts. We have more than 18 plus, I think, there are welfare fund acts, and each of the act is mandating to, for a welfare fund board. And this fund boards have more than 15 plus directors in the payroll, and they are looking into how to allocate those funds. And so the imprisonment in this cases comes where an employer is not, paying up that amount, and this amount is a very minimal amount, say, for example, 50 rupees or a 30 rupees per month payment. And if he is not paying it on a monthly basis, and the chances that he will be put behind bars is there in the act. So at this age and time, do you think there is a relevance of a board like that in Kerala? Especially we have this, labor identification numbers, and can we think of alternative systems wherein, the funds are allocated based on the numbers, and there is a particular one single body maybe to allocate it, and this labor also have the, liberty to move from a workforce. He might be working under an employer, and he is also having the freedom to move to another employer, and everything is captured at a single place. So do you think we should look into such possibilities as well?
You should. There should be no doubt on this. There should be absolutely no doubt on this. Again, your question has different parts to it. So let me start with the last one. One is that you need a certain amount of protection for the labor and allow him the mobility across industries or across units of production. And he should be able to carry his benefit through, whether it's EPF, whether it's ESI, whether it's some pension, whatever is the benefit. I think he should. That means he, like an Aadhaar number, he needs a single unitary identification number, whereas basic data is captured, and that number should be sufficient for him to kind of access or to receive the benefits from any of the welfare measures that we are talking about. You don't need 15 welfare boards and with 15 multiplied by 15 directors. That's the too expensive administratively. I think we should say that any welfare board should not have more than 1 or 2% of the total funds as its cost. The total expenditure per year, put a cap. Like today, there is a cap on the number of ministers in any assembly. Why shouldn't we have a cap of 1% of the total expenditure on administrative costs? Because you can do most of the things digitally, you don't need too much staff. And I would think that all these 15 can be merged into one. And you just need a good accounts guy to just keep track. And an algorithm driven kind of software which can track all payments on time, whichever bank it is. If the PM Kisan thing, which is so much in numbers and so much of amount of money, about 60-70,000 crores, can be managed with one joint secretary and one director in the Krishi Bhavan, I am sure all these welfare can be managed about a set of 20-30 people. So that clearly is more an efficiency economics argument than a legally binding argument. But yes, it makes a lot of sense to unify all the welfare measures. You can have different rates. I'm not even saying that everybody should get the same amount of benefit. If you want it distinct, fine. But you can codify them. Okay, you are in this kind of industry, this is what you pay, this kind of, because it's not difficult to keep track of different levels of contributions and at different rates, as long as you tie it to a labor identification number.
Right.
And an industry identification number if you want to do that. I mean, that's not difficult. It can be, whole thing can be driven digitally through a platform. And I think Kerala should just set it up and then one stroke remove all these boards. Well, of course, all these chairmen will be upset, but that's the price you pay for development. Right. You can't have too many free riders in the system. I think we have too many free riders in the Kerala economy, and that's where the problem is.
That brings me to my last question for the day. You being part of the system, you were part of the system, and you are also currently in various active roles right now as well. How easy or how challenging it is to bring a legal reform, a regulatory reform in a state like Kerala?
Well, it depends on which state. I mean, we have done it in different states and with different levels of success. It has been fairly easy in the center. I mean, I don't know, somehow the union government, because probably there is much more discussion about economic growth and GDP growth and per capita income and stuff like that in the national level. And there is a lot of people contributing to the discussions at the national level. You'll find much more serious data-based policy discussions around Delhi and its policies than in many states, except of course some states which are wanting to become a large economy like Maharashtra or even UP currently. They're all talking about reforms at a fast pace which will help them grow. Now Kerala, unfortunately, I have not seen a very strong narrative for economic growth, either in the media or in the large number of events that take place. I think if I were to be critical, I would think that Kerala has more cultural events than economic events. And I think culture is supported by a growth in economy. And this is something that we tend to forget. If there is no economic growth, there will be no cultural growth after some time, because it all costs money and somebody has to donate that money and he has to earn that money to donate it. So I think even the cultural czars should understand that economic growth is important. But much more important than that is, I would think that Kerala should pitch for a skill and education enabled economy, because large number of young people who have huge set of skills and knowledge are looking for employment either in Kerala or elsewhere. I mean, they have no problem. They'll go to any. I believe recently somebody said that Keralites are there in 182 countries. In fact, somebody was asking me which are those 15 or 16 countries where they are not there. So, so the youth here, I think, are looking for opportunities, and I think it's a political, social, economic compulsion. It should be for all of us to ensure that they do get adequate opportunities within the state. So I think the whole narrative of economic development without removing any of the welfare benefits of the poorer people, but removing the irritants in that process, I think we can create an economy which grows and a welfare which grows.
Right. So to sum up today's conversation, I think I'll borrow your lights. Like, what is it you want to get and what is it you want to achieve? And how do you want to achieve it? I think that should be kept in mind with respect to any of the regulatory reforms that we are undertaking in the state like Kerala. With this, we come to the end of this episode. Thank you, Nandakumar sir, for joining us in this conversation and sharing your insights on this topic with our audience. And we look forward to hosting you again for more engaging discussions. I would also like to thank all our listeners for joining us. Thank you, everyone. We'll be back with another thought-provoking and interesting episode.